Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taya and this is Taya's Turning Pages. So by the title of this video, you can tell that this is going to be my October wrap up. Now, I only read about 7 books this month, and that's only because I've gotten busy throughout the month, and it's going to be that way for me from here on out for a while. So yeah, I still don't think 7 is that bad, but it's not as high as I normally would like it to be, but it's fine, life happens. So yeah, anyways, let's get started. The first book that I read for the month of October was The Long Walk by Stephen King, and this story is actually set in a dystopian America, and we have to follow 100 boys who participate in this event known as The Long Walk. And so we go from having 100 boys to only 1 boy in the end, and the winner slash the last boy standing gets something known as the prize. And the prize is essentially anything your heart desires. So if you want financial security, you can get that. If you want job security, you can get that too. It's anything that your heart desires, which is only right and fair given the circumstances that these boys have to deal with in order to even get close to the prize. So like I said, this does follow 100 boys, and throughout this story you really get to see what these boys go through mentally and physically in order to get to the finish line. And there are specific rules that they have to follow in order to participate. So they cannot sit, they cannot stop, they cannot trip, they cannot stumble, and they cannot fall below a certain walking limit slash speed limit. And if they do, they receive 3 warnings, and after the 3rd warning, they die. So you can only imagine how intense this book was and is, and I thought it was phenomenal, to be honest. I did rate this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I love a good psychological horror slash thriller book, and that's exactly what this gave to me. It gave what it was supposed to give. And this was actually my first ever Stephen King novel. I have never read anything by him before. I've always been very intimidated and scared to even really dive into the horror genre, specifically reading Stephen King, just because I know that he has helped shape the genre into what it is today. And so I just have always kind of put it off, but I finally decided to just pick up a SK novel, and this was the one that I decided to choose because, again, it has that psychological element to it, not just the gore and the slasher type of situation, you know? So yeah, like I said, I thought this was a phenomenal book. Stephen King did write this under his pen name Richard Bachman. It came back out, I think, in 1979. So yeah, but like I said, this was a phenomenal book. Honestly, my legs and feet were hurting as I got to the end of the story. It was so intense, so grueling, so daunting, and I just would love to know what was going through his mind when he wrote this book, because how do you even think of something like this? I have no idea, but I think that Stephen King's writing is painfully real. It is painfully real, and it's just so crazy to me that he was able to turn one of the most mundane daily activities into something so horrific and so terrifying that now I'm looking at walking even differently. It was also very heartbreaking, as you can imagine, because you really get to know these boys as you're going through the story, and you get to know what they like and what their dreams and aspirations are, and it's just really sad to see and read about some of them dying, and dying in such horrific and violent ways, especially because they're boys, they're babies, they're 16, 17, you know, they're still kids. So it makes this even more emotionally taxing than what it already is. And another thing too that really stuck out to me through the book was that you really get to see, like I said, some of these boys forming real bonds and connections with one another, and you could tell that if they weren't in this event and if they were in another life, they would probably all be friends and they would all hang out. And that's what made it even more just heartbreaking because that friendship or connection that they all formed throughout this journey was so evident and so in your face throughout the entire book from the start to the finish that you did get attached to the characters, or at least some of them. My favorite was McBride, Peter McBride. He was my favorite, and he was the secondary character to the main character, whose name is Ray Garrity. I forgot his name for a second, but Ray Garrity is the main character, and then his confidant slash kind of closest ally in this situation is Peter McBride. And Peter was my absolute favorite. I loved him. I thought he was just such an interesting character, and you could tell that he was trying to make people feel comfortable and just trying to take people's minds off of the emotional and physical torture that they were all going throughout this walk. So yeah, I thought this was great. I definitely recommend picking this up and giving it a try if you're into psychological horrors slash thriller books. There are some gnarly, gory scenes in here, I will not lie. There are some, so just keep that in mind, but I think that's with any SK novel and any like book that's in the horror genre. So definitely look up trigger warnings for this book, for really any of these books, but in particular this one, just because like I said, there are some gory scenes that I had to bypass because I don't like any of that in my horror books, but I still enjoyed the story for what it was. The next book that I read was actually a classic, and it was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and this is essentially about a young man named Dorian Gray who is very handsome, very beautiful, very charming, kind, but also quite naive. And one day he decides to get his portrait painted, and he takes a look at this portrait once it's finished and realizes how beautiful the portrait is, but also how beautiful he is. And he starts to get really upset and really irate because he wonders why this portrait gets to remain beautiful and young forever while he has to grow old and, you know, just age and lose his beauty as time goes on. So he says this out loud to the painter and his other friend named Lord Henry, and he doesn't realize it at the time, but this was actually a wish in the making, slash he sold his soul in order to make this come true. And once he realizes that this wish has come true, he turns to a life of crime, of sinning, of corruption, and you start to see Dorian change drastically from the beginning of the book until the very end. So this book I rated actually a 5 out of 5 stars. I thought this was an amazing classic, and I can now understand why this book is so beloved and so highly rated within the classics community. Oscar Wilde's writing is truly beautiful, and I'm obsessed with it now, and now I want to read anything that he wrote because he just got it. You know, he understood the assignment, and everything about this story was just phenomenal. So this does talk a lot about religion, and it does have a lot of philosophical references mentioned throughout, and I thought that was going to be something that kind of turned me off, just because with older books and classics like that, they do harp on those topics a lot because that was just the time period. But honestly, it flowed throughout the story I think very well, and it made sense for what the story was, since it does focus on Dorian sinning and, like I said, his corruption and him committing immoral acts. And this book was actually considered a scandal because I'm assuming of how much it incorporated, like, you know, sinning and corruption and just turning to a life of crime. And you know, back then in that time period, this did take place in 19th century London, you know, they weren't with any of that type of stuff, especially not in their books. So this was considered a scandal, which I thought was very interesting. And this book, like I said, was just phenomenal. It honestly read at certain points in certain chapters, it read as if it was a modern day thriller slash horror book. And for that, I had to give it a 5 star, especially because if you can write a story years and years ago that can transcend into today's time period, you snapped. You did. Like, I don't make the rules. I don't make the rules, but I do. So yeah, Oscar Wilde did what he had to do with this book, and I just thought it was great. There were some violent scenes, which I was not expecting, to the point where I kind of jumped back at some of them because of how violent and how brutal and quick and abrupt they were. So do keep that in mind when you're going into this book. There are some scenes in here that do get a little out of control and a little chaotic, but other than that, I thought it was great. Like I said, it is like a gothic horror slash thriller type of story, so it made sense, you know, to include those type of scenes. And I actually already showed this in my book haul, which I will link above up here, but I did pick this up at Barnes & Noble because I want to hunt to collect nice and pretty editions of all of the classics that I really resonated with or that I rated 5 stars, and this book of course was in that category, so I had to pick this up from Barnes & Noble. This is only $10, which I think was a great deal because it's beautiful, as you can see, with the gold detailing, but also it has the green sprayed edges. There's a quote on the back here. So yeah, I love this edition, and I don't think I'm going to read from it. I do plan on rereading The Picture of Dorian Gray, but I don't think I'm going to read it from here. I think I'm just going to go back to my Penguin Black Classic Spine edition book and annotate it that way. But either way, I'm really excited to have this. So yeah, definitely recommend picking up The Picture of Dorian Gray and giving it a read. If you're trying to get into more classics, I think this is one of the more accessible ones. I think The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Phantom of the Opera are 2 of the most accessible classics that I feel like anybody can get into, especially if you're interested in thriller and horror type of books. I think that those would be great. The next book that I read was Survive the Night by Riley Sager, and this story follows a young college student named Charlie Jordan who is obsessed with movies and anything film and cinema, and she decides to leave her college campus before the semester is over because she's dealing with a lot of personal and mental health issues. Her best friend slash roommate was murdered, and she believes she was murdered by someone known as the campus killer or campus serial killer. So she decides to take off, and she doesn't have a car, and she doesn't really have a means of transportation to get back to her hometown. So she decides to hitchhike slash meet someone through this like ride sharing program that they have at their school, and she ends up getting in this car with this man, and she starts to feel as though he could be the campus serial killer. This is a really controversial book. A lot of people either really hate this book or really loved it. I am in the latter. I loved it. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think that this book was executed well. I'm sorry, like, I know, controversial. I clearly always like books that are trashed by the majority, but you know what, that's okay. That's what makes this fun. That's what makes reading fun, and booktube and bookstagram and book talk fun. We all like different things. We all you know, we all like different things, and we're all drawn to different things, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, there were some things in here that were very problematic that I was kind of, you know, side-eyeing the book and Riley Sager a little bit, especially the ending. Of course, I'm not going to spoil it, but if you read this book and you read the ending, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I didn't really understand Charlie's fate at the end with another character. I just thought it was very unrealistic, and usually I'm the type of person that will suspend any and all disbelief when it comes to reading books, especially romance and thrillers. I just feel like with those two type of books, you have to suspend disbelief, because if you don't, you're gonna be disappointed each and every time, because you're gonna sit there and say, this isn't realistic, this wouldn't happen in real life. Well, duh. But I'm sorry, with this one in particular, like the ending, that certain part of the ending, I was like, come on Riley Sager, there's no way in hell that you know this would happen in real life. Like, why would you even play like that? But other than the ending, I thought this book was phenomenal. I thought it was great. I really liked Charlie's character. I thought her passion for all things movies and film was so fun to really get to know and read through. I'm not a cinema or a movie buff person myself, but I like to know about other people's hobbies and interests, and I just thought that that was so cool that that was her thing, and that she could really rattle off any movie, any year, any title, any character at the drop of a hat. I thought that was so cool. In terms of her mental health issues, I don't really want to go into that like real in depth, just because I am not a mental health professional, so I'm not really sure if Riley Sager explored that very well and if he did that in a tasteful way. I will say that I think Charlie's movies were very interesting and honestly scary in the grand scheme of things when you really think about it, because that did lead her into certain situations that were really scary. But overall, like I said, I thought this was a great book. I personally enjoyed it. I had fun reading it, and I could see this being turned into a movie of some sort. I don't know how or why, but I could just see this being a movie. And here's my piece of advice. Of course, take people's reviews into consideration, and you know, if you really want to see what the general consensus is on a story, definitely look it up, but still remember to take that with a grain of salt and just pick up the book for yourself and see if you'll like it. I was very nervous going into this just because I have seen a lot of negative reviews on this story, and I understand why people did not like it. I totally get it. Again, the ending was really irritating, and there were certain things that Charlie did that just did not make sense at all, but I'm still happy that I picked up the book for myself and gave it a read, because now this book is in one of my favorite books of the year pile. So yeah, love that for me. So the next book that I read was A Lot Like Carios by Alexis Daria, and this is the second book in the Primas of Power series. The first book being You Had Me at Hola, which follows Jasmine. The second book being A Lot Like Carios, which follows Michelle. And then the third book, I'm not sure what that's going to be titled yet, because Alexis Daria is still in the process of writing that, but I'm assuming this book will follow Michelle and Jasmine's cousin Ava. So I rated this book a 5 out of 5 stars, just like I did with You Had Me at Hola. I'm not going to go too much in depth, just because I did film a reading vlog for this, and I will link that up above here if you're interested in learning more about my thoughts in real time. But I will say that this book was phenomenal. It was heartbreaking, it was stunning, it was beautiful, it was lovely, it was all the buzzwords that you could think of. I just thought that this book was phenomenal, and honestly I liked it just a little bit more than I liked You Had Me at Hola, and I loved You Had Me at Hola, but this book right here, it had so much depth, it had so much character development and growth, and again, it was just heartbreakingly beautiful because it explored a second chance romance. It explored childhood friends that fell out and that had a strained friendship that came back together and reunited. It was just beautiful, and it was like real, like it was like very authentic, you know. So I definitely recommend checking out this Primas of Power series if you can. You do not have to read the books in order. They are like standalone, so I think this is a companion series, very similar to the Brown Sisters trilogy. So if that's your vibe, I definitely think you will probably like these books as well. But yeah, definitely recommend just picking up the entire series, because it's just fun. It's more fun that way. The characters from the first book do appear in this book, and I'm assuming that these characters will appear in the third book. So yeah, definitely recommend picking this up. Alexis Daria is an auto-buy author for me. I am going to buy anything that that woman writes. She actually did collaborate with a few other Latinx authors for this holiday / like Christmas book, and I definitely plan on picking that up sometime soon. But yeah, I really think that you guys should give her and her work a try if you have not already, because this series is just it's chef's kiss. It's great. So the next book that I read was When the Reckoning Comes by Latanya McQueen, and I'm actually going to read the synopsis because it's a bit easier that way. And right here it says, a haunting novel about a black woman who returns to her hometown for a plantation wedding and the horror that ensues as she reconnects with the blood-soaked history of the land and the best friends she left behind. So yes, like the synopsis said, this is a horror book, and it does follow plantation life, slavery, and how we're still dealing with the ripple effects of that to today. And I don't want to give too much away just because I think you do need to go into this not really knowing too much, because I think it will pack more of an intense punch for the reader. But just know that you do get two modes of horror. You get a paranormal type of element to it, but you also get the actual literal and literary horror of slavery and how detrimental and horrifying racism can be, and white supremacy and anti-blackness and all of that type of stuff. So definitely recommend going into this, you know, kind of not knowing that much, or if you want to, definitely recommend looking up the synopsis, but I don't want to give too much away. Like I said, I thought this book was phenomenal. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I am still thinking about this book today. It's only about 256 pages, and y'all, this book, like I said, packed an intense punch, and I know it will stick with me forever. Similar to the main character, Mira, who is the black woman that the synopsis mentioned, she didn't really like to talk about stories that involve slavery. She didn't really like to read any stories that involve slavery. And similar to Mira, I was the same way. I just would always get very upset or very irritated or very pissed off by, you know, how all of that came to be. And so I would try to actively avoid it just so that way I wouldn't get angry. But this book made me realize that you can't do that. You have to reckon with the past, and you have to really understand all of what happened so that way we don't repeat history. So yes, like I said, phenomenal book, stunning. Latanya McQueen is an eloquent writer. I thought that the descriptions that she gave were so just, oh, they were so real and so lifelike. It's crazy how certain writers just have that knack for imagery and atmospheric tone and all of that type of stuff. I could picture the plantation grounds. I could feel the sweltering heat from the North Carolina sun. I could envision some of the gruesome and horrifying and heartbreaking scenes that she incorporated throughout this book. There is gore, so keep that in mind. There is a very especially gory scene towards the end of the book that still has my stomach churning to this day, but it was needed. It was needed for the story because, again, we have to reckon with the past. So I thought she was an eloquent writer, and I cannot wait to read more from her. I think this was a debut novel, and I hope this isn't her last. I hope she puts out more books because we need writers like that. We need writers and authors like her to continue to tell these stories and to keep reminding us that we cannot forget the past and we cannot forget this piece of history because we cannot repeat it. We can't. So the next book that I read was Everything We Didn't Say by Nicole Bart, and this was actually an October Book of the Month pick. And this story follows a young woman named Juniper Baker who decides to return back to her rural hometown years after being away because she wants to, one, solve the Murphy murders that took place in her hometown, but also she wants to reconnect with her daughter named Willa. And this pretty much follows a dual timeline, so you get to see what happened in the past and how the Murphy murders happened and how it played out, but then you also get the present day of Juniper trying to solve the murders but also trying to reconnect again with her daughter Willa, but also dealing with things from the past popping up in the present day. So this was a phenomenal book. I know I said that about every book because all of the books I read for October were amazing. This was a 5 out of 5 star. I thought this was a brilliant classic whodunit mystery. This is marketed as a thriller or a suspenseful thriller, and honestly I don't think it should be marketed as that just because, like, it's not that at all. I didn't find anything thrilling about it, except for I guess when we got up to the Murphy murders, but even so I still think that this should be marketed as a classic whodunit mystery. And it was great, it was phenomenal, it was stunning, and I definitely think that Nicole Bart is going to be one of those writers that I have to check out more and more because her writing style is absolutely beautiful. It is so poetic, so atmospheric, and honestly this book reminded me of Where the Crawdads Sing just because of how Delia Owens went into detail about just, like, again, that atmospheric tone. She set up that atmospheric tone. She also had that beautiful poetic writing style, and Where the Crawdads Sing, in my opinion, was also a whodunit mystery more than a thriller. So I loved Where the Crawdads Sing. That was one of my favorite books when it came out. I rated that a 5 out of 5 stars, and Honestly, this book, Everything We Didn't Say, brought up all of the feelings and emotions that I got when I read Where the Crawdads Sing, and for that, I appreciate it even more. So yes, if you like that book, I definitely think you will like this book as well, because it has that same vibe and that same wavelength. But I also think if you love dual timelines, you know, small town where everybody knows everyone's secrets and everybody knows everybody, but also just, again, that classic whodunit, I think that you'll really enjoy this book. I don't want to give too much away, similar to the last book that I just talked about, just because it is that mystery type of story, so I don't want to spoil anything, but I definitely think that you should pick this up if you haven't already. It is officially out now. It was only available to Book of the Month members for a while, but now, as of November 2nd, it is now available everywhere. So give Nicole Bart some support, because this book was phenomenal. She wrote this during the whole lockdown situation when it came to the pandemic, and it just is a really good book. I really can't say too much else about it. Like, it was great. I loved it. I definitely want to read more from her. I hope she comes out with more mystery and, you know, an actual thriller book in the future, just because I think she did a really great job with this book. So the last book that I read for the month of October was The Chalk Man by CJ Tudor, and I'm actually just going to read the synopsis just because it's a bit easier. But right here it says, in 1986, Eddie and his friends are just kids on the verge of adolescence. They spend their days biking around their sleepy English village and looking for any taste of excitement they can get. The Chalkmen are their secret code. Little chalk stick figures they leave for one another as messages only they can understand. But then a mysterious chalk man leads them right to a dismembered body, and nothing is ever the same. In 2016, Eddie is fully grown and thinks he's put his past behind him. But then he gets a letter in the mail containing a single chalk stick figure. When it turns out that his friends got the same message, they think it could be a prank, until one of them ends up dead. Eddie realizes that saving himself means finally figuring out what really happened all those years ago. Honestly, I still get chills after reading that synopsis. So I'm gonna try to speed through this review, because of course the maintenance workers are out here mowing the lawn as usual, so we're gonna try to get through this. But I did rate this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I actually got the suggestion to read this after watching one of Haley Hughes's videos. She hauled this in one of her videos, and I just thought the synopsis sounded very interesting, which is why I picked it up. And I think she's actually reading it for this month, so I cannot wait to hear her thoughts on it. But y'all, this book was a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. This is marketed as a psychological thriller, and honestly, they lied. It needs to be marketed as a horror book, because that's exactly what it is. This scared the living shit out of me. Like, CJ Tudor did what she had to do for this book. Like, phenomenal book. I know I said that about every book. That's like my buzzword of the day, but seriously, this book was so intense, so scary, so creepy, that I think that this was the perfect book to end Halloween and the spooky season, because I'm still thinking about this book, and I'm still thinking about some of the imagery that was like woven into the story. But yeah, just know that this should be marketed as a horror book. So know that before you go into it, in case you're interested in reading it. I do think that the story, like I said, was really good. I really like the dual timeline. So you're flashing back from 1986 to 2016, and I just loved the whole 80s aspect of it. I did not grow up in the 80s, but I really liked some of the slang words that were incorporated in it. I liked how there were certain things that were just specific to the 80s, and even just certain like ways that the children would, you know, go about their day. Like in the 80s, I know in particular, a lot of the times kids were able to just like do whatever they wanted and really like just ride their bikes without, you know, like parental supervision. They were able to just kind of walk around and do whatever they wanted. And of course, as time went on, that has changed, and now we don't really do things like that. So I did like, you know, seeing the other side of how childhood was for kids of the 80s, you know. I thought that was really interesting, and I always just like stories that take place in like the 80s and the 90s anyway, so I knew I was going to eat this book up. And again, it had that dual timeline, and I love me a good dual timeline, so I knew that this was going to be a great book that was right up my alley, and it was. It was just a lot darker than I originally thought it was going to be. So with that said, definitely make sure you look up trigger warnings. I wish I would have done that, but please make sure you look up trigger warnings, because there are a lot in here, like a lot of serious trigger warnings. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention was how gory this book was. There were a lot of gory and graphic scenes, which I did not personally like, because I'm not a gory and graphic type of gal when it comes to my thriller and horror books. I don't really like reading about people getting, you know, slashed and all that stuff. I don't like that. I don't really like that. I don't watch the Saw movies. I don't watch anything like that. So that really wasn't my vibe. So I did bypass a lot of those scenes. But if you're into that, then this is definitely the book for you. Even starting in the first like couple of chapters, there is something very traumatic and very disgusting that happens while the kids are at this carnival. So you get that that gore early on. CJ Tudor sets you up and lets you know how this book is going to be. So I do appreciate that, you know, CJ Tudor did that, but still it did, like, you know, just kind of like gross me out, you know. But either way, I still got through the story. I just bypassed those scenes and I loved it. I thought it was great, and I could see this being turned into a show or a movie of some sort just because of how creepy and how scary it was. I could see some of these directors or something like Guillermo, you know, turning this into like a scary movie, to be honest. So who knows, maybe one day it will become one. But yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on the Chalkman. I don't want to say again too much. I've said this for like the past 3 books, but I just feel like with mystery and thrillers and horror books, you really do need to go into them not knowing too much, because if you know a lot, then you're gonna be like kind of, you know, it's gonna ruin some of the element of the surprise, you know. So yeah, I don't really want to go too much into it, but those are my thoughts on the Chalkman. Those are all of the books that I read for the month of October. I had an amazing reading month. All of the books that I read were either 4.5 stars or 5 stars, and I love that for me. I love when I have a phenomenal reading month, and I just hope that I can keep up the momentum going into November, to be honest. I really hope so. I do have a lot of nonfiction reads that I would like to get to, so I don't know how this is gonna go, like in terms of 5 stars and stuff like that, because I do feel like it can get a little murky when you're rating nonfiction, just because like it's facts being presented to you, you know what I mean? But I guess the way in which it's told is really what determines like a high rating, I'm assuming. So yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what books you read for the month of October down below in the comments. Let me know if you actually read any of the books that I read, or if you plan on reading any of them anytime soon, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.